Lamps full understandings.
Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will have dreams, and your young men will see visions. I will even give my spirit to my servants, both men and women. I will work wonders in the sky above and on the earth below. The sun will turn dark, and the moon will be as red as blood before that great and terrible day when I appear.
Freely ye have received, freely give. Like, subscribe and share.
In this presentation, we are going to highlight the celestial signs that represent the birth of Jesus narrative. Structurally, we will look at the celestial sign, its date, and relate it to its corresponding biblical verse, matching context, description, and time frame as specified. In conclusion, we will arrive at the precise date that Jesus was born when he died, and therefore when he returns. Finally, we will come to realize that the date Jesus is born is a key to unlocking many other prophecies, including the Revelation.
Discussion. We are going to be talking about celestial events. One might ask, in what manner is this subject biblical? To answer that question, we need to go all the way back to the 14th verse of Genesis chapter 1. Genesis 1 verse 14. And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and years. God said, His celestial objects were designed for much more than lights and a basis upon which to regulate our days, months, and years. He also created them for signs and seasons. The concept of a sign, via Strong's, is off, that is a beacon or a signal. Signs are alerts, things that can be noticed. There is an additional related concept, called uth, which is, that, these things are consented, they are agreements. The sign is designed to agree with the verse in which it was appointed to timestamp. A season is, mo'odor, an appointment. It firstly refers to the festival appointments of the law of Moses. However, all of these festivals are also analogies for future prophetic appointed times. So in general, these are times of meeting. In terms of the festival, it's people gathering to meet each other. In terms of the celestial signs, the celestial sign is meeting the event on the earth in synchronicity, time-stamping it. One might think that because the verse says seasons, it is referring to our weather-related seasons. The seasons are generated because of the tilt that the Earth's axis is on with respect to its orbital plane around the Sun. The seasons are related primarily to the Earth's tilt, of which the verse does not actually mention. So primarily, the word season is there to tell us that it means appointed times in terms of prophetic, appointed times, and not the appointed times of weather seasons. So in conclusion, God made the celestial objects for signs and for seasons, means He made them to be beacons or markers that will happen in synchronicity. With an earthly prophetic appointed event and timestamp it, if we have an application that can relocate it, after the fact. The celestial signs that we are going to track within modern astronomy application software are all the signs related to the appointed times of the Nativity narrative of the birth of Jesus. If it is true that it is possible, in these high-tech latter days, to view the celestial signs in order to understand the exact appointed time, dates, that those events were happening on the earth, then I respectfully say, the debate whether there is a God or not has ended. All arguments as to whether there was a God that created the universe have ended. Any discussion as to whether the Bible is God's word or not has ended. These signs begin, March 12, 8 BCE. Why March 12, 8 BCE? March 12, 8 BCE equates to Nisan 1 in the Hebrew calendar of that year. As we turn up the Hebrew calendar, we can see that March 12, 8 BCE shows Nisan 3. However, this calendar is slightly inaccurate. What is important is that it reads the correct month of Nisan. We can turn to March 12, 8 BCE in the Stellarium astronomy application and see that it is a new moon, which is confirmation that it is actually Nisan 1. Why 8 BCE? As we examine the historical date of the death of Herod, we find that Herod died in 4 BC. This is confirmed by a blood moon that occurred on a Jewish fast day called the Fast of Purim. In his book, Antiquities of the Jews. Book 17 chapter 6, section 4, specifies, on the night before that day when the fast was to be celebrated. That very night there was an eclipse of the moon. This was not just some ad hoc time of fasting. This was, as Josephus wrote, an observed fast day, that very day which the Jews observed as a fast. Here's the full accounting that includes the blood moon on a regularly celebrated fast day. But the people, on account of Herod's barbarous temper, and for fear he should be so cruel and to inflict punishment on them, said what was done without their approbation. And that it seemed to them that the actors might well be punished for what they had done. But as for Herod, he dealt more mildly with others, but he deprived Matthias of the high priesthood, as in part an occasion of this action, and made Joseph, who was Matthias's wife's brother, high priest in his stead. Now it happened, that during the time of the high priesthood of this Matthias, there was another person made high priest for a single day, that very day which the Jews observed as a fast. The occasion was this Matthias the high priest, on the night before that day when the fast was to be celebrated, seemed, in a dream, to have conversation with his wife. And because he could not officiate himself on that account, Joseph, the son of Elymas, his kinsman, assisted him in that sacred office. But Herod deprived this Matthias of the high priesthood, and burnt the other Matthias, who had raised the sedition, with his companions, alive. And that very night there was an eclipse of the moon. Herod was very sick at this time, and it affected his decisions and his moods. One of these decisions, made out of this incredible illness that he suffered to death, was a decision to kill all the children in Bethlehem they could find that were aged 2 and younger. Josephus says Herod died, and his son Archelaus conducted 7 days of mourning. Chapter 8, Section 4. Now Archelaus paid him so much respect, as to continue his mourning till the 7th day, for so many days are appointed for it by the law of our fathers. In Chapter 9, a sedition was raised. Section 1. At this time also it was that some of the Jews got together out of a desire of innovation. They lamented Matthias, and those that were slain with him by Herod, who had not any respect paid them by a funeral mourning, out of the fear men were in of that man. They were those who had been condemned for pulling down the golden eagle. In short order, it reads as though, within the week of the completed 7 days of mourning, a Passover approached. Chapter 9, Section 3. Now, upon the approach of that feast of unleavened bread, which the law of their fathers had appointed for the Jews at this time, which feast is called the Passover. By the end of Section 3, the sedition had made its way into the middle of the Passover celebration. Archelaus sent out the whole army upon them, and sent the horsemen to prevent those that had their tents without the temple from assisting those that were within the temple, and to kill such as ran away from the footmen when they thought themselves out of danger, which horsemen slew 3,000 men, while the rest went to the neighbouring mountains. Then did Archelaus order proclamation to be made to them all, that they should retire to their own homes. And so the Passover ended up in bloodshed. Now, it's not difficult to research what the celebrated fast days for the nation of Israel are to find that there's only one fast day, that comes about 1 month before the Passover. That is the Book of Esther's, Fast of Purim, celebrated every year on Adar 13 as the day of fasting, followed by Adar 14 and 15 are as festival day. Esther 3 verse 13. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in 1 day. Even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The lot that Haman cast eventually fell on Adar 13. It took about 347 throwings of the lot before it finally said yes to Adar 13 as the genocide of the Jews' date. Esther 9 verse 18. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof. And on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So the genocide attempt did not succeed. Instead, the Jews were able to kill their enemies on Adar 13. The law was set, and the date could not change. However, they were able to create a new law that allowed them to defend themselves without repercussion. As a result of this blood moon on March 13th and Adar 13, a few weeks before Herod's death, we can confirm this 4 BCE as the correct year of Herod's death. The stellarium application shows the blood moon, a full moon, on March 13th, 4 BCE, Hebrew calendar 13th month, Adar 2. Normally, a full moon like this would be the 15th day of the month, but this month is a 13th month, Adar 2. The full moon month number has been altered from the normal lunar cycle pattern because this is a leap year, a catch-up month. In this case, the full moon, blood moon, is the timestamp of the appointed time. God is the one who chose the Adar 13 at the time of Esther to project the Adar 13 of 4 BCE in which the children of Bethlehem would undergo a genocide. To finish answering why are we starting at 8 BCE? Matthew 2 verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked by the wise men, was exceeding wroth, and sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. When Herod, being very sick, lost his patience, he ordered the soldiers to kill the children of Bethlehem and the surrounding area from age 2 and under. Why is that? Because the wise men told Herod diligently, meaning accurately, that they saw the star that represented the child's birth about 2 years prior. As a result, if Herod died in 4 BCE, then about 2 years prior would be 6 BCE. If the birth of Jesus is 6 BCE, we need to go back to the beginning of 8 BCE to work forward through the courses of Abia to the conception of John and on to the birth of Jesus. About 6 months after John is born. We have seen one celestial sign tied to a genocide, appointed time on the earth, the blood moon happening about 3 to 4 a.m., early in the morning to catch people by surprise. Yes, all the specific times of the signs are also relevant and plausible in the context. In addition, there is a second celestial sign that confirms for us that March 12, 8 BCE is the actual correct starting day for this string of signs. We find that the celestial signs are like a clock. The numbers are the information and the hand floats above the number in order for us to tell the time. So also, the constellation is the information, like the numbers on a clock, and it is Jupiter, which floats above the constellation to confirm that the sign has been met. If we look up March 12, 8 BCE, and we look to see where Jupiter is, we will find Jupiter in Aquarius. Aquarius is called the water carrier, and it is an image of a man pouring water out of a bucket. Jupiter is the largest planet, a multicolored planet, and therefore, it represents Jesus. We find Jupiter in Aquarius, March 12. 8 BCE. What is the verse that tells us that this should be the case? Numbers 24 verse 7. He shall pour water out of his buckets. Aquarius is pouring water out of his bucket. If you recall, Balaam is silenced by God and can only speak what God allows him. Just before this, pouring water verse, he is in a trance. His eyes are open, and he is seeing the vision of God in his mind, and he speaks these words as he sees a vision of Aquarius pouring water out of his bucket. Numbers 24, verses 2 to 4. And Balaam lifted up his eyes, and he saw Israel abiding in his tents according to their tribes, and the Spirit of God came upon him. And he took up his parable, and said, Balaam the son of Beor hath said, and the man whose eyes are open hath said. He hath said, which heard the words of God, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. What are the chances that this verse, within the Balaam star chapter, verse 17, which is describing a water carrier, is in the same year we expect the course of Abia to begin? The water carrier pours water out of his buckets onto the crops for people to drink. Jesus is our provider of the water of life. Here we have Aquarius pouring water out of his buckets, and Jupiter is located there as confirmation that the prophecy Balaam is seeing is in 8 BCE. Jupiter travels around all the constellations once in about 12 years. As a result, starting in 4 BCE, of all the possible years, you only need to go back 4 years, and Jupiter is there in Aquarius. The earliest that Jupiter is in Aquarius is February the 4th, 8 BCE, just over 1 month before the new year begins. He shall pour water out of his buckets. The sign is telling us when to start looking to make an accounting of which day the angel Gabriel visited Zacharias while he was serving in the temple according to the timing of his course of Abia. Luke 1 verse 5. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias, of the course of Abia, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. In case one might think Jesus and his parents spent a long time in Egypt either before or after Herod died, consider Matthew 2 verse 19. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeareth in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. They were told that when Herod died, they could leave Egypt. So it is sometime shortly after Herod dies. We were told by Josephus that there is a Passover about 2 weeks after Herod dies. At this Passover, there is a lot of rioting, a lot of death, and the feast is scuttled. Normally to miss a Passover was against the law. Numbers 9 verse 13. But the man that is clean, and is not in a journey, and forbeareth to keep the Passover, even the same soul shall be cut off from among his people. Because he brought not the offering of the Lord in his appointed season, that man shall bear his sin. However, there were a few exceptions. Numbers 9 verse 10 and 11. Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If any man of you or of your posterity shall be unclean by reason of a dead body, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto the Lord. The 14th day of the second month at even they shall keep it, and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The requirements recorded for the Passover in Numbers, chapter 9, say that if a person is in a journey afar off, then they can keep the Passover on the 14th day of the following month. It is for this reason that God had them go across the border into Egypt, because at that point they would qualify to skip the Passover of Nisan of that year. And so this is the reason that provides confirmation, along with Josephus, that there was a Passover. They did not need to go outside of the country just to get away from Herod, but they needed to go outside of the country to be excused for not keeping the Passover that was shortly to come to pass. Therefore, they left for Egypt shortly before March 13th, and they returned to Nazareth shortly after the Passover, which was April 10th, about 1 month later. What have we understood? This is only the beginning of a great many signs. At first, one might find such a thing unbelievable, but with each next sign it builds into a glorious perspective of God's communication to us. As the signs accumulate, they defy the odds. Summary of understanding. Celestial events serve as signs and seasons, markers synchronizing with prophetic events. Celestial signs using modern astronomy software prove the Bible's accuracy and God's existence. God placed the signs in the heavens to affirm the sure word of his prophecies, so we will not be unaware. Accounts from the writer Josephus are instrumental in dating the death of King Herod. A lunar eclipse coincided with the fast of Purim, March 13th, Adar 13, 4 BCE. In proximity before Herod dies, link this date to the genocide date of the Bethlehem children. Herod's death date is about new moon March 27th, 4 BCE. Interestingly, the date Jesus is circumcised, flesh cut off, in 6 BCE is also March 13th. Celestial signs, specifically Jupiter's location in Aquarius on March 12, 8 BCE, aligns with Numbers 24 verse 7, referencing a water carrier pouring water. Similar to the constellation Aquarius. Jupiter acts like the hand of a clock. When it is present within a constellation, it confirms a sign. To determine Jesus' birth date, calculations trace back to 8 BCE. In consideration of the 224-week priestly courses leading to John the Baptist's conception and the birth of Jesus 6 months after John is born.
Gabriel's visit. November 2nd, 8 BCE. Recap. The last video in this series was titled from Numbers 24, verse 7, "He shall pour water out of his buckets." We learned that Jupiter was in Aquarius, a figure of a man pouring water out of his bucket in fulfillment of the vision that Balaam saw, which occurred on new moon, new year, Nisan 1, March 12, 8 BCE. This is the first vision that Balaam saw, signifying that this is the starting point from which we can calculate the priestly courses. Namely, the 8th course of Abiah, which is the patriarchal family of Zacharias, father of John the Baptist. Introduction. In this lesson, we're going to understand how we can arrive on the day that the angel Gabriel visits Zacharias, November 2nd, 8 BCE. To do this, we have to chart the priestly courses, to see where in the calendar the 2 different weeks of Abiah in particular fall. Feasts are founded in the lunar cycle. Before we proceed, let us establish foundation by reflecting on God's Levitical priesthood arrangement. It is important to recognize that the law and its details are constantly forming the foundation of New Testament and celestial understanding. God set his feasts into a lunar calendar configuration. His months begin new moons, his feasts and festivals often began the 15th, full moon, that is, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Feast of Tabernacles and Shushan Purim. The month of Nisan was made the month of months in which began the religious new year containing the Passover Seder. The Feast of Weeks contained a large variety of sacrifices, signifying it was the first resurrection. The Feast of Trumpets is an identified new moon signifying the seeing of Jesus when he returns on the last trump. The trumpet is blown every new moon. Tishri 1 is the last of the 7 trumpets, like the Jericho 7 trumpets in one day that were blown before the last trumpet and the shouting that brought down the Jericho walls. The feasts are fixed periods in the calendar which map on to prophetic times that will play out in future times on the same calendar periods. These feast events are iterated every year like the movement of a clock never stopping, or changing speed always keeping time. The heavenly bodies are a very predictable set of movements, yet complex. God has simplified his signs into new moons and full moons because we can always identify them with regularity and reduce that movement to mathematical formulation. This ability to understand the movements according to mathematical law enables us to go forward and backwarding in time with stunning accuracy. In this age, we have the ability to display mathematical computation into graphical representation on a screen using graphical user interface technology. Every new moon are opportunities for solar eclipse, and every full moon is an opportunity for a blood moon. This is why we see many verses embedded into prophetic chapters that will describe the moon and the sun as dark, a solar eclipse, or the moon has turned to blood. A full moon that looks red due to light refracting or bending and separating as it passes through our atmosphere. You can see how God has designed this arrangement to connect his celestial signs to his feasts and therefore onto his future prophetic events. On this foundation we can chart the time Gabriel met Zacharias when he was serving in the temple in the year 8 BCE. Understanding the elements needed to chart Abijah's 2 courses or division weeks. 1 Chronicles 24 describes the families who were selected and lists the order that they would serve, an order that was never changed. In verse 10, we learn that Zacharias was of Abijah, which was in the 8th position. 1 Chronicles 24 verse 10. The 8th to Abijah. Before you can chart the courses, you have to know that one course would come in every Sabbath and fulfill the evening work, while the existing course would fulfill the morning work and leave. If not dismissed, the 2 working courses met each other midday on the Sabbath. Of course, it is the existing course or division that is already there in the morning to serve and then leave, and so it is the incoming that handles the evening and begins its week. This arrangement of coming in to handle the evening service and going out in the morning is described. 2 Chronicles 23 verse 8. So the Levites and all Judah did according to all things that Jehoiada the priest had commanded, and took every man his men that were to come in on the Sabbath. With them that were to go out on the Sabbath, for Jehoiada the priest dismissed not the courses. Jewish commentaries also record the transition of temple service in the same manner. These 24 mishmarot conducted the daily temple service, each in turn officiating for 1 week. Every Sabbath they changed, the retiring mishmar offering the morning and musaf additional sacrifices, whereas the new mishmar offered the evening one. And laid the fresh showbread on the table Sukkah 4 verse 24 and 25. The only exception to the strict family allotment of weekly service is the co-joining of all the priests together on feast weeks. Again, Jewish commentaries explain that all the families take part during feast weeks to serve together in those weeks. Feast weeks are never allotted to any one family. On the 3 pilgrim festivals, all the 24 mishmarot officiated together Sukkah 5 verse 7 and 8. Summarizing the foundation for charting Abijah's course weeks. 1. That the year begins Nisan 1, confirmed by Balaam's constellation prophecy, he shall pour water from his buckets. 2. The course of Abijah, which is the patriarchal family of Zacharias, is the 8th week beginning the new year. 3. It is the order of the courses, that the existing course serves Sabbath morning then leaves, and then the incoming course serves the evening and remains until the 7th morning of the next Sabbath thereafter. 4. Feast weeks are served by all families together and never allotted to any one single family. And 5. The arrangement adhered to the principles of fairness and equal time. Plotting Abijah's first week. As we approach the plotting of the weeks in which Abijah served in the temple, we see it here beginning on a Wednesday, March 12, 8 BCE. The stellarium application, of course, is displaying the accurate days of the week. 3 days later will be Saturday, March 15th. On Saturday morning course 1 serves and leaves. Saturday evening course 2 arrives. The following Saturday morning, its course 2's turn to serve and leave, while course 3 comes in Saturday evening, March 29th. It is an important element of the division arrangement that no family course is diminished to less than 7 days service or augmented beyond 7 days. Every family would receive equal time, an attitude of complete fairness, that when necessary, involved the drawing of lots as the mechanism for decision-making. Luke 1 verse 9. According to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. As a result, when a course would begin their week, that course would finish the week. On feast weeks, There's no diminishment or extension of family time. We scheduled the courses to come in Sabbath evening before the beginning of the feast. Abaya, being the 8th course, never coincided with a feast week. As we plot through to the 8th course, we see that Zacharias began serving Sabbath evening of May 3rd, and completed his week Sabbath morning of May 10th. At this point, we take notice that May 10th is a new moon and a solar eclipse day. This eclipse occurs Saturday morning 10:50 a.m., well after sunrise. Is it possible that Gabriel is visiting Zacharias during this Saturday morning solar eclipse? We have come to know that all of the signs are happening on new moons or full moons, of which solar eclipse occur on new moons. In this instance, Zacharias would have effectively completed his morning service at sunrise. Secondly, we see that this is not a solar eclipse visible over Jerusalem. Luke 1 verse 23. And it came to pass, that, as soon as the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. Given that the verse says that after Gabriel visited with him, he needed to accomplish the days of his administration before he could depart. At this time on the morning of May 10th, his administration is effectively finished already. There are no more days to accomplish. It would appear that this solar eclipse does not qualify as a time when Gabriel would have been visiting Zacharias at the burning of the incense. Plotting Abiah's second week. As we continue the flow of the courses, we see that Course 1 begins the evening of September 6th and Course 1 exits September 13th. The courses are suspended for the week of the Feast of Tabernacles, and Abiah's course begins the evening of November 1st. Again, we notice that there are only 2 solar eclipses in the year 8 BCE, May 10th and November 2nd, and courses of Abiah land on both of these dates. The solar eclipse of November 2nd is a Sunday evening. It's the second day of his course week, of which sunset, when Zacharias will be burning the incense, is at the hour of 1754 and the eclipse is at 1947, about 1 hour and 53 minutes apart. It was the custom that the people would wait outside the evening service to hear if God had anything to say to the priest while he spent time in the holy place. Luke 1 verse 21. And the people waited for Zacharias, and marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. We learn that the people waited an inordinately long amount of time beyond the normal time in which the priest would come out after lighting the incense. It was the task of Zacharias to light the incense in the evening and the morning. Exodus 30 verse 8. And when Aaron lighteth the lamps at even, he shall burn incense upon it, a perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations. In the evening there was an animal sacrifice along with the burning of the incense, and God said at that time he may meet the priest and speak to him, and he would, through the priest, meet with the children of Israel. The priest would then relay what God spoke to him via the angel unto the people. It is for this purpose that the people were waiting for Zacharias to come out in order to share what God potentially had to say. On this occasion they had to wait an abnormally long period of time. Exodus 29 verses 41 to 43. And the other lamb thou shalt offer at even, and shalt do thereto according to the meat offering of the morning, and according to the drink offering thereof, for a sweet savour. An offering made by fire unto the Lord. This shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, where I will meet you, to speak there unto thee. And there I will meet with the children of Israel, and the tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory. And so it is in Luke 1 verse 21. We see a correlation between the people being astonished as to how long they had to wait for Zacharias to come out and the amount of time, about 2 hours, between the sunset and the eclipse of November 2nd. Closing remarks. This brings us to a close as we have identified the day and time in which the angel Gabriel came to visit Zacharias, November 2nd at sunset. The concluding time must fulfill the reason the people are astonished that it took Zacharias so long to come out. Whatever the sign is, it must explain that verse. We did not look for that evidence, it simply presented itself. We looked for the starting point of the year, and we simply plotted the courses as they are ordained in the Old Testament. Then, we determined that the first week, May 10th, did not agree with the idea that Zacharias needed to finish out his course after the visit with Gabriel, because the May 10th solar eclipse was a significant number of hours after sunrise. Therefore, Zacharias was already substantially finished. As we continue to plot to the second of his courses that year, a solar eclipse lands on his second week just as it did his first week. And it just so happens, the solar eclipse occurs a few hours after sunset, causing the astonishing amount of wait time for the people. Finally, after November 2nd, Zacharias would need about 7 days to finish out his course. For most people, these two events are not enough proof to suggest that we are looking at appointed times. It's not the idea that just two events would be convincing. The real convincing occurs when one has completed seeing all of the events. It's the complete string that creates the maximum amount of improbability for these not to be appointed times, because they do coincide with all the details given in the Nativity verses. In fact, the details seem to be provided precisely for one to be able to confirm that one is seeing the actual relevant celestial positions. Next event. Next, we will look at the signs related to the conception of John that begin 16 days after Gabriel's visit, November 18th, 8 BCE. Conception of John the Baptist. November 18th, 8 BCE. This video is part of a series. The previous installment is titled Gabriel Visits Zacharias, November 2nd, 8 BCE. Recap. We learned that on November 2nd, 8 BCE, the angel Gabriel visited Zacharias on his second day of service that week. It was a Sunday evening and the meeting took place at sunset when the incense was burned. Luke 1 verse 9. According to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. And there appeared unto him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. We found a solar eclipse on this same day about 2 hours after sunset. Upon reading this verse in Luke 1 verse 21. And the people waited for Zacharias, and marveled that he tarried so long in the temple. The sign of the solar eclipse, we see, would relate to when Gabriel departed, and bounds the length of time Gabriel talked with Zacharias, which created the long wait time for the people. Zacharias unable to speak. Zacharias had an apparent moment of doubt for what the angel was telling him, and so there was a consequence imposed upon him designed to remove all doubt. It is interesting, even the listener of this video will continue to have doubt until they get to the very end. Similarly, Zacharias retained his inability to speak until the season of his wife's pregnancy was complete. Luke 1 verse 20. And, behold, thou shalt be dumb, and not able to speak, until the day that these things shall be performed, because thou believest not my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season. Just when Zacharias has something to say to the people, he is rendered mute. Because Zacharias is unable to speak, Elizabeth has available to herself the idea that she will keep the pregnancy secret for 5 months. Before we explore why the 5 months of Elizabeth in hiding, we first need to review the time frame between Zacharias completing his service through to the conception of his son, John the Baptist. Breakdown of Zacharias' days from Gabriel's visit to the conception of John. Luke 1 verse 23. And it came to pass, as soon as the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. We are given, Zacharias must first finish or accomplish his service time. We suspect that he will begin his travel the following Sunday morning. That is 6 days accomplished from the Sunday evening that Gabriel meets him to the next Sunday morning after the Sabbath, when he is permitted to travel under the law. Where did Zacharias live? Luke 1 verse 39. And Mary arose in those days, and went into the hill country with haste, into a city of Judah. When Mary went to visit Elizabeth, she went to the hill country in Judea. We don't know exactly where Zacharias lived, but realistically the travel, on foot, would be no more than 2 days. These travel days 7 and 8 are Sunday 9th and Monday the 10th. We are up to a total of about 8 days since Gabriel's visit. Zacharias has now arrived back home, November 10th. As we check our calendar, we find there is a partial lunar eclipse blood moon that occurs on November 18th. By the time this day is completed, it will be 8 days since Zacharias has been home. During those days Zacharias will have had conjugal visits with Elizabeth for 7 days to morning of 18th. We suggest that the successful conjugation occurred on the morning of the 18th day, partial lunar eclipse, blood moon, November 18th. Summarizing days to conception. There are 16 days between Gabriel's visit and the blood moon that would represent a successful conjugation. That 16 days represents 6 days for Zacharias to finish out his course, 2 days of travel and 7 days to accomplish a successful conjugation and 1 day for the natural conception process. Breakdown of time from conjugation to conception of John the Baptist. There are 2 time frame events that are required for the conception of a child. There is the time for the male contribution to travel, and the female egg contribution also needs travel time. They meet and finally the egg is fertilized. When we see the blood moon, this being an unclean time, we suspect this to be the male contribution time being successful. Next we see the full moon remains until the moment it begins to start to wane. We can follow the time it takes for the full moon to go from the blood moon phase to the point that it begins to cease from being a full moon. We see that the blood moon, which had occurred about 5:30 a.m., is not an unusual time for conjugation activity. The full moon continues right up to midnight, about 18 hours later, where it meets a star cluster called Messier 35. This star cluster is located at the left foot of the Castor figure of the Gemini twins. In this position, the moon is about to start waning, just as it comes into conjunction with a star cluster. It is interesting that inside the egg, after it's fertilized, the cells are dividing rapidly, and they cluster, and so here we have a star cluster, about the size of the moon, which also resembles an egg with a clustering of new cells forming inside. We came to realize that the conception, which is a woman's egg being fertilized, is now multiplying with cells, is located at a star cluster called M35, which has many stars in it, of which 7 are prominent. I would suggest that John the Baptist is conceived at this point, November 18th, 8 BCE. Elizabeth hides herself. How can we substantiate from the scriptures that the November 18th is correct? It is the story related to Elizabeth hiding her pregnancy that gives us the evidence we need. Next lesson. In our next video titled, Elizabeth Hides Herself, April 14th, 8 BCE, we will discover why she hides herself and what is the sign that marks the event of her pregnancy revealing.
Elizabeth hiding. April 14th, 7 BC. This video is part of a series. The previous installment is titled Conception of John, November 18th, 8 BC. Recap. In our last video, we learned the date when John the Baptist was conceived, 16 days after Gabriel visited Zacharias in the evening while he burned incense in the temple. This meeting ended in a solar eclipse. We found that the final resting spot of the moon, that represented the moment of conception, was the moon located beside a star cluster called M35. This star cluster is located at the left foot of the Castor figure of the Gemini twins. We are going to see this star cluster play another similar role in the case of Messiah, a pattern with respect to John's conception sign. Twins are a subject of the Bible which contains 3 sets. This is a separate study with a powerful understanding concerning Messiah. John is conceived, and next Elizabeth hatches a plan.
Luke 1 verses 23 to 25. And it came to pass that as soon as the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. And after those days his wife Elizabeth conceived, and hid herself 5 months.
As a result of Elizabeth's plan, our questions are, why did Elizabeth hide herself, and what is the date that she comes out of hiding? To answer these questions, let's go back and recount the history of Elizabeth. We recall, Zacharias and Elizabeth had no children.
Luke 1 verse 7. They had no child, because that Elizabeth was barren, and they both were now well stricken in years.
Where does the 5 months take us? It is scientifically measured that a lunar cycle equates to 29.5 solar days. Therefore 5 lunar cycles amount to 29.5 times 5 is equal to 147.5 solar days. When we begin to travel through the calendar starting from November 18th conception of John, we see month after month of normal planetary movement activity, no blood moons, no solar eclipse, no comets. Only everyday normal objects and movement. However, when we do arrive on April 14th, we see that there is a faint lunar eclipse. The Earth shadows a very small portion of the Moon, a very faint light grey, about 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. The shadow is so small and faint that it was difficult to locate. as if it was hiding. In addition, the moon has gone 8 hours hiding below the horizon.
The hiding solar eclipse. Pay attention to the moon's lower right corner to see the Earth's shadow cast upon the moon. Notice that when the speed is increased, the shadow moves across the moon faster and it can be seen. However, it does not last for long. But, when the speed is slower or more natural, the shadow is harder to spot and notice. If you didn't know at what time to look, it would be more difficult to find.
The manifested sign is matching the context and literal reading of the verse. In comparison to the context of the narrative, the sign presents in a manner that looks like the event it is representing. The 5-month period November 18th to April 14th amounts to 148 days and arrives at a full moon lunar eclipse. The time of the eclipse is 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon in the middle of the high holy day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread gathering. God's word gave us 5 months of Elizabeth hiding, and correspondingly 5 lunar months, or 148 days from the November 18th conception, lead to a major social gathering confirming Elizabeth's motive. The given time frame that Elizabeth reveals herself lands on the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where she would be amongst a significant number of friends and family. Such a time would be very opportune to vindicate herself from a life of cruelty by scorn and the stigma of being barren. As a result, since the 5 months leads to an appropriate outcome according to her motive, not only is the landing date for this 5 months correct, the conception date has received confirmation as well. The April 14th is synchronized with the verse time frame. Therefore, the lunar eclipse sign, according to the astronomy application, is happening in the heavens precisely at the same time that Elizabeth is revealing herself. The sign appears at 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, an appropriate time. If these signs present with such like-kind characteristic as compared to the verse that speaks to the celestial moment, what will be the experience of the future signs we are yet to follow? Signs in synchronicity with the gospel. The world contains many religions, each one professing to be the only true religion, each having their own book. It's a constant debate over how one is true above the other. However, if one of those professed true religions has a physical location in which all of their history resides, and there are celestial positions in the heavens above that physical location coordinated with events inside their book, then there remains little doubt as to which one is of God. Background of barren women. It is a common theme in scriptures that the mother of an important child is barren. Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, Samson's mother, and Elizabeth were all barren at one point. In addition, we are given that God is called the husband of the nation of Israel. Great men of God come forth by barren women as shadow iterations of a great future reality. Israel described as God's woman.
Isaiah 54 verse 5. For thy Maker is thine husband, the Lord of hosts is his name.
In Hosea, God speaks of being betrothed to his nation of Israel.
Hosea 2 verse 20. I will even betroth thee unto me in faithfulness, and thou shalt know the Lord.
However, God also refers to his nation as barren.
Isaiah 54 verse 1. Sing, O barren, thou that didst not bear. Break forth into singing, and cry aloud, thou that didst not travail with child. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, saith the Lord.
Normally it's the woman who has many children that rejoices, but here, God is telling his nation to rejoice because eventually, it's the barren woman who has more children than the one who had many. The woman Hagar had many children. However, they have a false hope. Whereas the children of the barren woman would rejoice, because she would produce the Messiah. The one good child, and out of that one good child would come the children of faith and true hope that will endure forever, while the children of Ishmael will be long gone and forgotten. As Paul writes in Galatians 4 verse 25, we are not of the woman in bondage to the Mosaic law, the earthly Jerusalem. We are of the free woman, the new Jerusalem that comes down from heaven, which is Jesus. Galatians 4 verse 26. Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. Revelation 21 verse 22. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. We will see the fruition of the barren woman overtaking the fertile woman, which is the lack of faith and righteousness in the history of mankind, that will be removed, and only a multitude of faithful to God will remain and abide forever with God and Christ. John the Baptist, a type. John the Baptist will be from a barren woman. He is going to be one of these important children, not the Messiah, but a forerunner, who will prepare the way for the Messiah's work. A type of herald for the coming of Messiah. When Messiah left and ascended, he had developed apostles, and the work of the apostles was to spread the word of the gospel, heralding the second coming or return of Jesus. We are of a long line of those who herald the Messiah, proclaiming his acceptable day to come. Gabriel visits Mary. In our next video titled, Conception and Star of Jesus, we're going to find a solar eclipse on April 29, 7 BC, when the angel Gabriel comes to announce to Mary that she is going to bear the Messiah child. Recall that it was a solar eclipse that accompanied Gabriel visiting Zacharias to announce to him that he would have a child. Gabriel visiting Mary's solar eclipse is the beginning of the signs of the story of the conception of Jesus, which are patterned after the conception of John's signs, but with an important difference. John in this respect is a forerunner to Jesus. Even their conception signs, as we will see, have similarity and pattern.
Conception and Star of Jesus. To birth of John beginning April 29th, 7 BC. This video is part of a series. The previous installment is titled Elizabeth Hiding, April 14th, 7 BC. Recap. In our last video, we learned that once Elizabeth had conceived, she hatched a plan to hide herself for 5 months. Elizabeth had received a form of societal mistreatment for being barren, which became the motive behind her idea to keep her pregnancy a secret. We learned that she revealed her pregnancy at the Feast of Unleavened Bread in Jerusalem to maximize her revealing to friends and family and receive vindication for the years of scorn she received. Her motive is given.
Luke 1 verse 25. To take away my reproach among men.
Next in the narrative is the occasion of Gabriel visiting Mary. Elizabeth has her day of glory, then the angel Gabriel arrives to give Mary good news. As God does, he drops breadcrumbs for us to follow in the latter days once we have the modern-day tools to follow these time frames. God provides the information that the angel is visiting Mary while Elizabeth is pregnant within her 6th month. In other words, the 5th month has completed as it was in our last video, and she is now working through her 6th month.
Luke 1 verse 26. And in the 6th month the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee, named Nazareth.
If we are not sure of the time frame to which Gabriel is referring, we receive clarification in verse 36 that it is the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy.
Luke 1 verse 36. And, behold, thy cousin Elizabeth, she hath also conceived a son in her old age.
Finding the sign of Gabriel visiting Mary. We know that Elizabeth's 5th month ended on full moon April 14th lunar eclipse. We also know that according to the lunar structure of God's prescribed feast days, that God's signs occur only on full moon or new moon. We simply need to move through the days from April 14th until we get to the next new moon, 15 days later, to see if there's anything there that would make sense as a sign of Gabriel visiting Mary. We find that a solar eclipse is occurring on April 29th. This is the day that the angel Gabriel visits Mary. At this point in time, Elizabeth's pregnancy is 5½ months, which is, in her 6th month. The next possible opportunity for a sign is 14 days later, full moon of May 13th, in which time Elizabeth will have completed her 6th month and begun her 7th. Gabriel must be visiting April 29th. May 13th does not conform to the requirements of the verse because it is no longer within the 6th month time frame. The solar eclipse pattern. The solar eclipse of April 29th in which Gabriel visits Mary is the first of 2 solar eclipses occurring in the year 7 BC. We also saw that only 2 solar eclipses appeared in the year 8 BC. Each related to the 2 different weeks of Abia. Following the pattern, this solar eclipse of April 29th also represents the angel Gabriel visiting Mary. We're also going to find the second solar eclipse that occurs in 7 BC is a total solar eclipse that goes through the Middle East area where the wise men were from. Since we see the angel Gabriel visiting Zacharias and Mary on solar eclipse, it is quite possible that the angel Gabriel also visited the wise men. It would not be unprecedented. The wise men were visited in a dream to be warned to go home another way. Additionally, the angels also visited the shepherds during this appointed times period. Signs are always appropriate in the time of day they appear and the constellation backdrop. I have never found a full moon or new moon sign with empty space as a backdrop. The solar eclipse of April 29, 7 BC appears in Taurus the Bull about 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon, an appropriate time of day for Mary to be awake and going about her business. The bull as the backdrop at this time is a biblically correct symbol of Jesus, the most valuable of all animal sacrifices. The beginning of the birth of Jesus. After the angel gave Mary wonderful insights into the future of her child, she wondered how she could have a normal human child since she was a virgin. And so the angel answered.
Luke 1 verse 35. And said unto her, The Holy Spirit shall come upon thee, and the power of the Highest shall overshadow thee. Luke 1 verse 37. For with God nothing shall be impossible. Luke 1 verse 38. And the angel departed from her.
The next appointed time is to determine when the angel Gabriel will return to overshadow Mary. Once again, we only need to travel through the calendar beginning April 29th, and we arrive 14 days later on May 13th, full moon, lunar eclipse beginning about 8:30 p.m. through to midnight when Mary is likely asleep. The moon is about 80% overshadowed by a light grey shadow cast by the earth, which is between the moon and the sun. The overshadowed moon sign matches the description in the verse and occurs at a time appropriate for the event in that Mary is asleep and does not feel anything. The angel Gabriel departed after speaking with Mary, but not before promising that the power of the Holy Spirit would return and come upon her at another time. That other time was described as an overshadowing, and here we find the sign only 14 days later, a lunar eclipse with a light grey overshadowing of the moon. What does this overshadowing mean? The overshadowing event is not a conception time, I believe with evidence, it is a medical operation not without precedent. God operated to produce Eve fabricated out of Adam's bone, or more specifically from his DNA. What kind of operation is this performed on Mary? Could it also have something to do with Adam's DNA? We will soon see that the conception of Jesus will be at the same spot where we found the conception of John, namely, the left foot of the Castor figure of the Gemini twin constellation. The nature of the relationship that Jesus has with Adam will be a separate video, but I do leave you with this one curious verse. Over time, humankind breed towards better-looking features. However, Jesus was not good-looking.
Isaiah 53 verse 2. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him.
The next event in line is the conception of Jesus. Often with respect to a woman having a child, the word will specifically mention the woman conceived and then bear a child. In the Nativity narrative, the words Mary conceived Jesus are not directly used. However, it is clearly but indirectly indicated. If we follow the narrative, we can see where this is. The narrative jumps from Mary visiting the angel Gabriel directly to Mary arises in those days and travels to the hill country of Judea in a hurry to be with Elizabeth to help with her pregnancy, and surely is excited to tell her what has happened to herself.
Luke 1 verse 39. And Mary arose in those days, and went into the hill country with haste, into a city of Judah.
Mary arrives at Elizabeth's home, greets Elizabeth with her voice, and as soon as Elizabeth hears Mary's voice, the babe inside of Elizabeth leaps for joy just while Elizabeth is filled by the power of the Holy Spirit. It is when Elizabeth responds to the power of the Holy Spirit entering into her that she gives away the information that Mary has conceived.
Luke 1 verses 42 to 44. And she spake out with a loud voice, and said, Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb. And whence is this to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For, lo, as soon as the voice of thy salutation sounded in mine ears, the babe leaped in my womb for joy.
Elizabeth, in an overjoyed voice, acknowledges that Mary has been blessed with a child. Mary does not declare to Elizabeth that she is with child because Mary very likely doesn't even know yet that she has conceived. Elizabeth specifically says, Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, which means the conception of Jesus exists as fruit by that time. Elizabeth acknowledges that Mary is the mother of her Lord, specifying that Mary is in that moment a mother and she knows the child she carries is Messiah. Elizabeth also provides the information that not only is she acknowledging that the Messiah is conceived already within Mary, her child John, now being about 6½ months old, leaps in her womb, by the power of the Spirit he has received, is aware of and reacts to the proximity of his cousin Jesus, just as the words of Gabriel promised to Zacharias come true, as he said.
Luke 1 verse 15. And he shall be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb.
What is the date of the conception of Jesus? Just as we follow the verse and see where the verse leads us, we also follow the signs to see where they lead. The next appointed time sign that God provides is new moon beginning May 29, 7 BC. The actual moment that the new moon is occurring in conjunction with the sun is about 4:25 a.m. as viewed from Jerusalem. At this point in time the moon is aligned with the sun, but it is below the horizon as viewed from Jerusalem. This doesn't negate the sign but suggests there is something more. The M35 star cluster that we saw as the conception of John is perfectly nestled in between the moon and the sun and square with the ecliptic line. All three are in conjunction with each other 4:25 in the morning May 29, 7 BC at the left foot of the Castor Gemini twin. This is the conception point of Jesus. The star cluster indicates this. We find that at this same time the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn has begun and they are square with the ecliptic at this same moment. Is this the moment that Jesus is conceived? We have a confirming calculation which should equal 280 normal human gestation days from conception to birth. The birth date we have already understood and fixed as March 5, 6 BC. This will be confirmed again in the next video of this series. The number of days inclusive between May 29, 7 BC, and March 5, 6 BC is 281 days, one day too many. Apparently we need to venture one more day to receive the confirming 280 days. When we advance one more day we arrive at the religious new moon. The religious new moon is the moment that two eyewitnesses can confirm that the first crescent of the moon is visible. To see this point in time, we need to go to the next day to May 30th and get to the time of about 8 p.m. The sun has set and it is dark enough that the first crescent of the moon can be seen just minutes before the moon itself will descend below the horizon. At this moment of time, about 40 hours after the new moon conjunction with the sun, the first crescent of the moon would be visible to the naked eye. The moon is in the Pollux star side of the Gemini twins. Typically the first crescent of the moon is visible between 24 and 48 hours after the new moon, just as the sun is setting in the evening or the moon rises in the morning before the sun. This Pollux side of the Gemini twins is described in Revelation as representing Jesus. Here the Pollux twin is highlighted by the moon during the religious new moon, pointing to the Jesus figure of the Gemini twins. Is this confirmation that Jesus's process begins at the M35 left foot of the Castor Gemini twin and ends at the Pollux figure? The sun-moon conjunction new moon through to the religious new moon is a slightly different conception process, needing more time for Jesus to officially begin multiplying cells on May 30th. Around 8 p.m. It is appropriate that Jesus' existence on Earth begins at a religious new moon on the chest of the Pollux Gemini twin, as his existence on Earth again will occur on a religious new moon feast of trumpets, the last trumpet of
Revelation 11 verse 15. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord, and of his Christ, and he shall reign for ever and ever.
We calculate the number of days between May 30th and March 5th as 280, inclusive of those two dates. Within the hour after spotting the first crescent of the moon on May 30th, the moon will be below the horizon. When you see the moon rising over the next horizon in the morning, it has moved to the constellation Cancer. In summary, the conception is a process. There is an operation time of May 13th when a natural process takes 17 days. The final stage, called conception, begins on May 29th, exactly when the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction star effect occurs, forming what looks like a star to the wise men. Then, one day later, at sunset on May 30th, when the first crescent of the religious new moon is visible, the cells begin to multiply within the zygote. Jesus exists. Confirmation that the religious new moon is Jesus manifested. At this moment, the religious new moon is over the Pollux figure of the Gemini twins. Who is this Pollux figure? Revelation tells us it is Jesus.
Revelation 14 verse 14. And I looked, and behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle.
As we look at the constellation Pollux, we see it fulfills all the attributes of the Revelation description. It sits upon the Milky Way cloud. An orange-hued star is at its head, called Pollux. A sickle is in its hand. The term Son of Man is known to refer to Jesus. The Pollux star is set apart by its spectrum, being one of the stable anchor points by which other stars are classified. The next event is 3 months later, when John is born. Shortly after, Mary is carrying Jesus and he is on his way to normal human development. She travels quickly to be with Elizabeth during Elizabeth's pregnancy until John is born, about a 3-month stay.
Luke 1 verse 56. And Mary abode with her about 3 months, and returned to her own house. Luke 1 verse 57. Now Elizabeth's full time came that she should be delivered, and she brought forth a son.
Given Mary stayed with Elizabeth for 3 months, we simply need to locate the third new moon after Jesus is conceived to arrive at. New moon August 25th, birth of John the Baptist. The time period between May 29th and August 25th inclusive is 89 days. This number is in keeping with about 3 months, but maybe a day or two less to account for Elizabeth's travel time. Recall, John's conception landed on midnight of November 18th. As a result, we're going to begin his conception calculation starting November 19th. The time period between November 19th, 8 BC to August 25th, 7 BC inclusive is 280 normal human gestation days. We find the new moon and Tuesday, August 25th, 7 BC, that represents the birth of John is situated at the head of Virgo, Mercury is at her waist and Venus is at her feet. The Virgo that represents the nation of Israel upon the birth of John is signified as being full of light. Venus is referred to as the day spring or morning star is at her feet as we read.
Luke 1 verses 78 to 79. Through the tender mercy of our God, whereby the dayspring from on high hath visited us, to give light to them that sit in darkness, and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace.
Now that we have finished the connections between the celestial signs and their verses related to the conception of Jesus, we can compare them to the conception signs of John. 1. John and Jesus were both announced on solar eclipse by Gabriel. 2. John and Jesus both have lunar eclipse events. John's is a blood moon, but Jesus's is not. The conception of Jesus does not involve a biologically unclean act. 3. John, Gabriel visit to lunar eclipse and M35 conjunction conception of John are 17 days November 2nd to 18th inclusive. Jesus, lunar eclipse overshadowing to M35 Sun conjunction conception is 17 days May 13th to 29th inclusive. 4. Both gestation periods equal 280 days. John, November 19th to August 25th, Jesus May 30th to March 5th. 5. The conception of John and Jesus both occur at the M35 star cluster, which is located at the Castor figure of the Gemini twins. There are 3 sets of biblical twins which lead to a deep understanding related to this conception location taken up in the video, Biblical Twins Mystery. 6. The consummation of Jesus is signed when the first crescent of the moon appears in the Pollux figure of the Gemini twins about 40 hours after the M35 conjunction. The consummation of John is at the M35 conjunction. This divergence reveals a difference in the biology related to each conception. 7. The birthday of John is signified by Virgo being full of light about 2:30 p.m. The birthday of Jesus is the Adar 15 Shushan Purim Jewish festival day celebrated every year. Wise Men total solar eclipse. The next event we see is a total solar eclipse that goes through the Middle East, which is the location the wise men traveled from.
Matthew 2 verse 1. Now when Jesus was born, 2 years prior, in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, just before he died, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem.
We have seen a pattern of Gabriel visiting on solar eclipse during this period. Possibly they visited the wise men to inform them of what the star represents they have been seeing now for almost 5 months. Balaam prophecy informed the wise men. The wise men received information from Daniel. We see where Daniel is passing on his visions to his colleagues.
Daniel 7 verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream, and told the sum of the matters.
In the Balaam prophecy the constellations are provided. March 12, 8 BC, Nisan 1, where we first begin to chart the course of Abia. Jupiter in Aquarius.
Numbers 24 verse 7. He shall pour the water out of his buckets.
The first of 3 conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn begins the star effect approaching Pisces. Pisces is shaped as it were a map of Israel. May 29, 7 BC.
Numbers 24 verse 17. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel.
The place of many waters called Pisces where Jesus will be born.
Numbers 24 verse 7. And his seed shall be in many waters, and his king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted.
The wise men, having access to the book of Numbers, as they follow the star would have recognized these constellations throughout their observation and observational records. We will continue with the next sign when the star of the Balaam prophecy has formed May 29th and leads us to the day Jesus was born. Look for the next video titled, The Star to Temple Presentation of Jesus.
The Star, May 30th, 7 BC. In the last installment of the Nativity Celestial Signs, we covered a series of signs that began with Gabriel meeting Mary. We now want to cover the star. For continuity, let's remind ourselves of what we've been through to get to the star point in time. By reading Numbers 24, Matthew 2, and Luke 1 will give you familiarity with all the points that are touched here. Overview. There is an overall picture of John conceived, developing for 6 months before Jesus is conceived, then 3-month overlap before John is born. Then, Jesus is born 6 months later. 6, 3, 6. Conception of John to birth of Jesus spans about 15 months. The narrative is new moon and full moon centric because all of God's feasts are situated that way, as the sacred and high holy days, which receive a doubling of sacrifices. The prophecies fall on appointed times which are all lunar-based as the calendar God required the Levites to keep was lunar and periodically adjusted to coincide with the solar cycle. What will become interesting are the ways that God projects a 5-month period after Elizabeth conceives, and projects a 6-month period after John is born. God's visions through Balaam. The story begins when Balaam's narrative gives us the constellation sighting, "He shall pour water out of his buckets," revealing the constellation Aquarius, where Jupiter must be to identify the starting date, new moon, Nisan 1, 8 BC, beginning of the religious New Year calendar. The players. There are 12 constellations of ancient descriptive origin that populate the ecliptic line in which all the planets travel on a very similar plane. Planets can appear to overlap each other as they pass each other by in our line of sight. In addition to these 12 constellations that all represent biblical characters, we have 2 additional constellations that are Ophiuchus Serpens located just above Scorpius and Aquila, which means eagle in Latin, located just above Capricornus, a unicorn-type mystical beast. Jupiter is like the hand of a clock. The hand is either on top of a clock number or in the signs it's on top of the constellation that the verse described. The verses do not specify Jupiter. However, in this celestial solar system, there are only 8 planets including Earth. Of all the planets, Jupiter is the largest by far and multicolored, therefore it represents Jesus or Jesus types, while Saturn is the second largest planet and it has pretty rings, giving it a more feminine look which represents women. In the Nativity story, Saturn is presented as Mary settled into Bethlehem, in the return of Jesus. Saturn is presented as the bride of Christ, who returns with Jesus and his procession through the East Gate. Course of Abia. We are given the story of the courses of Abia, where Gabriel meets with Zacharias, while he is serving his course. God is deliberately giving us the ability to make a computation. Naturally, we are being guided to use Nisan 1 as the beginning point upon which to calculate the courses of a Abia. Nisan 1 is the only significant date that has a relationship to the priestly order that is in very close proximity after Jupiter enters Aquarius in 8 BC. But God doesn't make it too easy. It requires some investigation to come to an understanding of how the courses worked. We need to know that the priests would come in Sabbath evening, perform their weekly duties, and after Saturday morning their service ended. If it's not charted in this fashion, you will not have an accurate rendition of the dates in which Zacharias was serving that year. In the celestial sign investigation, we are always looking for new moon and full moon because God has accentuated the sacredness of all the new moons and full moons during his festival prescriptions. The first course week. We notice that the 2 solar eclipses of 8 BC both land on course of Abia weeks. The first one does not eclipse over Jerusalem, and when it does eclipse, it's a Saturday morning when Abia has already finished his course. Due to these 2 points, this Saturday morning date is disqualifying. Saturday morning does not account for Zacharias needing to finish his course before he can go home. The second course week. Zacharias' second course week includes a solar eclipse that lands on a Sunday night, his second evening of his course week. The people waited so long. The solar eclipse of Zacharias' second course week occurs almost 2 hours after sunset. The scriptures give us that Gabriel meets Zacharias at sunset when he's lighting the incense. Then it says the people waited outside for much more time than is normal before Zacharias comes out. The amount of time is about 1 hour and 50 minutes between sunset and the solar eclipse. The timing of the solar eclipse allows us to compute how much time the people had to wait. God told Moses that he would meet with the priests in the evening to speak with them, so people routinely waited in the evening for the priest to come out. So he could tell them what God may have said to him, and therefore through him the priest said to the people. Conjugation of John. Zacharias now has to finish out his course, as it says, for about 7 days to be able to travel home the following Sunday. He travels for a couple of days, and then it takes about 7 days for his wife to conceive John. This basic estimation is within proximity to the 16 days that follows Gabriel's visit, in which we see a blood moon. Because this is a normal human process, The conjugation is represented as a blood moon, because it's an unclean action. The moon travels to its furthest extent as a full moon up to midnight and arrives at the left foot of the Castor Gemini figure in conjunction with the Messier 35 star cluster. A star cluster looks like a female egg with stars as cells multiplying inside the egg. There is an important understanding related to the signs appearing in the Gemini twins for another time. Elizabeth hiding. How does God connect the time between the conception of John and into the narrative of the conception of Jesus? The pattern is that the celestial signs are continuously connected by time frames that have a biblical answer. The time frames in the Bible are driving where and when to look for the next sign. We are conveniently given that Elizabeth wants to hide herself for 5 months, but we do not understand why 5 months, why that number. As we travel down the path of celestial signs after the conception of John, there's no solar or lunar eclipse from mid-November to mid-April. However, in mid-April exactly 5 lunar cycles brings us to the high holy day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is when Elizabeth would finally reveal herself when she's in Jerusalem in the middle of a significant crowd of family and friends, especially those priests who were shaming her all her life. We find that it's not just the occurrence of a full moon or new moon. The celestial object and constellation background have correspondence with the character and description of the event being signed. On that day there was a lunar eclipse with a very slight small overshadowing, which is hard to notice, and the moon itself descends the Jerusalem horizon. The characteristic of the moon matches the theme of the story being signed. Gabriel visits Mary. We are given the time frame that Gabriel visits Mary, while it's inside Elizabeth's 6th month of pregnancy. We only need about 2 weeks to arrive at the solar eclipse in which Gabriel meets Mary, just like a solar eclipse is utilized when Gabriel meets Zacharias. Mary overshadowed by the Holy Spirit. Gabriel tells Mary that in due time, the power of the Holy Spirit will come and overshadow her. This overshadowing will occur for the purpose of initiating a biological process by which she will conceive a child. We find about 2 weeks after Gabriel visited with Mary, there is a lunar eclipse mid-May, which is about an 80% light gray darkening when the moon moves into the Earth's shadow, which is the definition of a lunar eclipse. In the scriptures we often like to say and speak of many Old Testament stories as being shadows of future manifestations or future iterations. So it's interesting that God presents his signs as Earth casting a shadow on the moon or the moon casting a shadow on the Earth to date stamp his prophetic appointed time events. Jesus conceived. About 2 weeks later, we see that Jupiter and Saturn come together, called a conjunction, to form what looks like one very large bright star. This occurrence is very rare because they will stay together for about 7 months and end in the delivery and birth of Jesus in Bethlehem 280 days later. They cross over each other a total of 3 times, all while the background stars remain looking stationary. Jupiter and Saturn, being planets, normally move across the sky, but in this case the background stars look stationary, making this conjunction of 2 planets appear as a star, fulfilling God's prophecy through Balaam. This has happened once before about 1800 years earlier. And it's only going to happen again 5 more times throughout the entire history of mankind for a total of 7 times. Only one of those 7 remains several hundred years into our future. At this time, only one of these occurrences, beginning May 29th, 7 BC, can have any relation to the Nativity story of Jesus. The only one that represents Jesus as he develops within his mother Mary's womb. We find a new moon and sun with the Messier 35 star cluster situated in between, at the left foot of the Castor Gemini figure. Jesus is a twin. In Revelation, a celestial description is made of the Pollux figure of the Gemini twins as a son of man, Jesus, sitting on a cloud with a sharp sickle in his hand and a golden crown or star at his head. The Pollux constellation image is of a young boy sitting on the cloud of the Milky Way. He is holding a sickle with an orange-hued star at his head that is used as a standard for measuring all other stars. It only stands to reason that the Castor image of the Gemini twins therefore represents Adam, just as the New Testament speaks of the first Adam and Jesus as the second Adam. The New Testament Holy Spirit imbued writers knew that there should exist a concept in which Adam and Jesus must be understood as twins. When you say first Adam and second Adam, you are specifically implying identical twins. Exactly how was Jesus born? The Gemini twin constellation is informing us by what biological method in which Jesus was born, that is through a cloning operation to produce an identical twin of Adam. This type of medical procedure mankind has done. And it essentially requires that you take the nucleus out of a preserved cell of Adam and replace it with the nucleus of the cell that comprises the egg of Mary. We are given that Adam underwent a medical operation that entailed removing some of his genetic material in order to create Eve. We are given that Mary also, without her knowledge at a time, she is likely sleeping, undergoes an operation termed being overshadowed by the power of the Holy Spirit. Even though this concept is not overtly spelled out in the written Gospel, we are often given throughout the Gospel that one passage contains additional details that fill out the story also presented in a separate passage. Likewise, the celestial sign fills the gap of information, as it were, that you do not find explicitly described in the Bible. There are many details within the celestial signs that fill the gap of understanding that we need in order to properly have a more full or complete message of God. It is no wonder then why the Bible contains 3 other twin situation occurrences which provide important shadows of the fact that Adam and Jesus are also twins, which makes the 4th occurrence. The temple is founded on the concept of 4 square, providing the importance of things having 4 witnesses. The day Jesus exists as a growing human. We find one day after the scientific new moon, May 29th. The religious new moon and its first crescent can be seen May 30th. As this happens, the moon is on the chest of Pollux. The cells of Jesus begin to divide on May 30th. As a result, when he is born March 5th, 6 BC, his normal human gestation period is 280 days. Mary visits Elizabeth. We are given that very shortly after Mary has conceived, she hastily goes to visit Elizabeth. After 3 months, John is born and Mary leaves. Between John's conception November 18th, 8 BC, and John's birth, August 25th, 7 BC, is 280 normal human gestation days. John is said to fill Israel with the impending light of Jesus upon his arrival. When he is born, the sun is in Virgo towards her shoulder, Mercury is at her waist and Venus is at her feet. The entire Virgo, the woman that represents Israel, is filled with light. Traveling with the star. On the day that the conception of Jesus begins, the star also begins. The star would have been easily noticed by the Persian astronomers. Then, a total solar eclipse occurs October 23rd, 7 BC through the Middle East with its central line through southern Saudi Arabia. Did the angel Gabriel visit with the wise men on a solar eclipse? It was a solar eclipse when the angel Gabriel visited Zacharias and Mary. We often wondered, how did the wise men figure out that the star which represented the birth of Jesus was the meaning of this apparent star-looking event unless they were given help? We will follow the star, God's way of allowing us to travel the 280 days in which Jesus is developing within the womb. The astronomy application allows us to see with our very own eyes what the wise men actually saw. Sighting the star. Before reviewing the details of the star event, let's watch it play out without interruption through to the birth date. As you're watching, you will see that Jupiter comes up from behind Saturn and catches up to it, because its orbital period is much faster, being about 12 years, whereas Saturn is about 30 years. Jupiter passes Saturn. Approximately 5 months later it will retrograde and pass Saturn again. As an aid, we have focused and fixed a star in the distant background so you can notice Jupiter and Saturn remaining in the same locality against the background celestial heavens. They're not migrating rapidly across the stars the way planets normally do. Early December, about 2 months later, they will conjunct for the 3rd time. During the period December to February, they begin to split apart as Jupiter moves across Pisces. Pisces, the 2 fish, is mentioned in the book of Numbers when God says, "His seed shall be in many waters." Suddenly Mars and asteroid Juno come into play, as they swoop into conjunction with Saturn. The date is February 21st, 6 BC, and Mary has 12 days remaining as she arrives and settles at Bethlehem. And finally, Mars, Juno and Jupiter conjunct 12 days later. Jesus is born. The asteroid Juno represents the seed, as it says in Numbers 24, his seed shall be in many waters. Mars, of course, represents the unclean and painful process of giving birth. Jupiter represents Jesus. Saturn represents the female. The comet. In addition to the objects Mars, Jupiter, and asteroid Juno lining up on February 21st and lining up again March 5th, 6 BC, 12 days later when Jesus is born. The comet 2P Encke joins the other three to make four planetary objects lined up in both of the Saturn and Jupiter positions that represent Mary settling into Bethlehem and Jesus being born. The asteroid is too small to see as we focus on the comet in this video, but it is there of course since the time has not changed. As we move through the days, starting with the four lined up at Jupiter and follow the comet lights up as it goes through to about the day that Jesus is presented in the temple. The comet changes course in motion, highlighting the moment when Jesus is receiving honor and glory during his presentment in the temple. It is particularly confirming that the comet lights up at this time. The comet accentuates the glory of the birth through to temple presentment.
When Jesus was born March 5th, 6 BC, 8 planetary elements aligned and synchronized with the text. 1. Jupiter, the hand of the celestial clock which reads 12 when all the hands are aligned, representing Jesus and known as the king planet, came into alignment with 2. Mars, representing the pain and uncleanness of birthing. 3. The comet, 2P Encke aligned, and shortly will light up when Jesus is presented in the temple the 45th day. 4. The asteroid Juno, representing the seed of Numbers 24 verse 7 aligns, making a conjunction of 4 bodies. 5. The date is a full moon in Virgo, representing Israel, which receives the light of the world born unto her, and the shepherds are the first to be invited to lay eyes on the young child. The shepherds have the moonlight to see their way from the fields at night. 6. Sun was aligned close enough to the comet for it to develop a bright tail that then illuminated the day Jesus was presented in the temple. 7. All located in the constellation Pisces, the constellation surrounded by other watery constellation characters. Numbers 24 verse 7, his seed shall be in many waters. 8. The earth is located with a vantage point to see all these things from our perspective.
In our next video, as we continue the Nativity narrative to his circumcision, his first missed Passover, his presentment in the temple, the obeisance he receives as he is in the temple, leading to the celestial sign that occurs at that same time, which looks just like Joseph's dream in which he receives obeisance. Then, to the children of Bethlehem being killed, the wise men showing up on Herod's doorstep, the death of Herod, and through to the Passover, 2 weeks after Herod dies. Upon that second missed Passover allows Jesus and his parents to come out of Egypt and head back to Nazareth, where all the sons of David went to live, as it were, to hide from those who try to kill off the line of David.
Lab's full understandings. Please like, subscribe and share. The events after the birth of Jesus. Circumcision, Day 8. First missed Passover, Day 29. Presentment in the Temple, Day 45.
On the 8th day after Jesus was born, March 12, 6 BC, he was circumcised. A separate video called The Circumcision deals with this celestial event subject in more detail. On the 29th day in Bethlehem, Mary and Jesus are still in an unclean state from birth through day 40, Leviticus 12 verse 2-4. The date is April 4th, 6 BC, a full moon Passover date. In this unclean state, they both must avoid going up to Jerusalem and attending the Passover. It is interesting to see this as a shadow of his future manifest destiny to be cut off on the Passover, as we find a blood moon at Virgo's feet on this first missed Passover day. Just before we discuss the new moon on day 45 when Jesus is presented in the temple, let's just recount what it is that makes us so sure Jesus was born, March 5th, 6 BC. Essentially the star effect that the wise men saw, which concluded in the birth events day.
Before reviewing the details of the star event, let's watch it play out without interruption through to the birth date. As you're watching, you will see that Jupiter comes up from behind Saturn and catches up to it, because its orbital period is much faster, being about 12 years, whereas Saturn is about 30 years. Jupiter passes Saturn. Approximately 5 months later it will retrograde and pass Saturn again. As an aid, we have focused and fixed a star in the distant background so you can notice Jupiter and Saturn remaining in the same locality against the background celestial heavens. They're not migrating rapidly across the stars the way planets normally do. Early December, about 2 months later, they will conjunct for the third time. During the period December to February, they begin to split apart as Jupiter moves across Pisces. Pisces, the two fish, is mentioned in the book of Numbers when God says, "His seed shall be in many waters." Suddenly Mars and asteroid Juno come into play, as they swoop into conjunction with Saturn. The date is February 21st, 6 BC, and Mary has 12 days remaining as she arrives and settles at Bethlehem. And finally, Mars, Juno and Jupiter conjunct 12 days later. Jesus is born. The asteroid Juno represents the seed, as it says in Numbers 24, "His seed shall be in many waters." Mars, of course, represents the unclean and painful process of giving birth. Jupiter represents Jesus. Saturn represents the female. The comet. In addition to the objects Mars, Jupiter, and asteroid Juno lining up on February 21st and lining up again March 5th, 6 BC, 12 days later when Jesus is born. The comet 2P Encke joins the other three to make 4 planetary objects lined up in both of the Saturn and Jupiter positions that represent Mary settling into Bethlehem and Jesus being born. The asteroid is too small to see as we focus on the comet in this video, but it is there of course since the time has not changed. As we move through the days, starting with the 4 lined up at Jupiter and follow the comet lights up as it goes through to about the day that Jesus is presented in the temple. The comet changes course in motion, highlighting the moment when Jesus is receiving honor and glory during his presentment in the temple. It is particularly confirming that the comet lights up at this time. The comet accentuates the glory of the birth through to temple presentment.
When Jesus was born March 5th, 6 BC, 8 planetary elements aligned and synchronized with the text. 1. Jupiter, the hand of the celestial clock which reads 12 when all the hands are aligned, representing Jesus and known as the king planet, came into alignment with 2. Mars, representing the pain and uncleanness of birthing. 3. The comet, 2P Enki aligned, and shortly will light up when Jesus is presented in the temple the 45th day. 4. The asteroid Juno, representing the seed of Numbers 24 verse 7 aligns, making a conjunction of 4 bodies. 5. The date is a full moon in Virgo, representing Israel, which receives the light of the world born unto her, and the shepherds are the first to be invited to lay eyes on the young child. The shepherds have the moonlight to see their way from the fields at night. 6. Sun was aligned close enough to the comet for it to develop a bright tail that then illuminated the day Jesus was presented in the temple. 7. All located in the constellation Pisces, the constellation surrounded by other watery constellation characters. Numbers 24 verse 7, his seed shall be in many waters. 8. The earth is located with a vantage point to see all these things from our perspective.
The star was a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. This effect will only occur 7 times within God's 7,000-year plan. The first was about 1800 years before Jesus was born. 4 additional occurrences have taken place, and the 7th is several hundred years yet into the future. When the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn completed in 6 BC, we found 4 celestial objects coming into conjunction all together on March 5, 6 BC. A comet, Mars, Jupiter, and an asteroid. When we complete the 29th day from his birth, we come upon a blood moon, April 4th, 6 BC. This is the first Passover of Jesus, and because he and his mother have not completed the mandatory 40 days of purification for a male child for the woman to remain away from the temple, Jesus and his mother are unable to attend this Passover. It would seem appropriate that there is a blood moon on this day, as Jesus misses a Passover. This is the first Passover that Jesus missed, and the second will also be when Jesus is in Egypt after fleeing from King Herod's attempt to murder him while he was a 2-year-old in Bethlehem. On April 18th, 6 BC, on the 45th day after he was born, Jesus was presented in the temple. On these occasions, when a child is presented to God before the priest, it would be customary for the priest to kiss the child. Every newborn male had to be presented. Eventually, one of those children would be the Messiah. On that day we are given a sign, which is a kissing solar eclipse over Jerusalem. This solar eclipse has an epicenter in the Atlantic Ocean, and only the very edge passes over Jerusalem, causing it to have a very, very small, slight overlap, which is the image of the sun and the moon kissing. Psalm 85 wrote about this celestial event.
Surely his, God's, salvation is nigh them that fear him, that glory, Jesus, may dwell in our land. Mercy, God, and truth, Jesus, are met together. Righteousness, God, and peace, Jesus, have kissed each other. Truth, Jesus, shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness, God, shall look down from heaven. Righteousness, God, shall go before him, Jesus, and shall set us in the way of his, Jesus's, steps. Psalm 85 verses 9 to 11, 13.
There is no doubt in my mind that Psalm 85 is specifically worded to describe the day that Jesus is presented in the temple. The fact that this moment and context are lined up in real time with a solar eclipse that is the image of the sun and the moon kissing is a testament that we are on the absolute correct timeline of the life of Jesus. This chapter constitutes one of the most intimate, touching, and memorable biblical tracts that will forever be at the top of my favorites. Among so many other scriptures, it requires a moment of silence as we ponder these words again.
Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. Truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. Righteousness shall go before him, and shall set us in the way of his steps.
When they were in the temple, an elderly man who was very devout was guided by God to go see Jesus while he was being presented. Simeon gave praise to Jesus and said these words.
For mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people, a light to lighten the Gentiles, and the glory of thy people Israel. And Joseph and his mother marveled at those things which were spoken of him. Luke 2 verses 30 to 33.
Likewise, an elderly woman named Anna was very devout, and she also met Jesus, gave thanks for him, and told everybody about him.
And she, coming in that instant, gave thanks likewise unto the Lord, and spoke of him to all them that looked for redemption in Jerusalem. Luke 2 verse 38.
So it was, when Jesus was presented in the temple, he received praise and obeisance from others. We are still looking at this same presentment in the temple moment, and have found that in addition to the kiss of the sun and moon solar eclipse, we find in the narrative that Jesus is praised, extolled, and obeisance is given unto him. We recall that Joseph, the mistreated son of Jacob, had a similar moment. When he was revealed in a very unexpected way, it became a great moment of intimacy between him and his brothers as they reunited and shared tears of joy and forgiveness. We are going to see as we simply zoom out from our focus on the solar eclipse. The planet Jupiter is going to be surrounded by the image of Joseph's dream that foretold the day that he would be honored by his father and his mother and his 11 brothers. A long time ago, a young man named Joseph was much loved and given a multicolored coat by his father. He became a great ruler in Egypt and was a prominent type of Christ. One day he had a dream, and he told his parents the details of it.
And said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And, behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. Genesis 37 verse 9.
As we are looking at this same kissing solar eclipse and begin to zoom out, we see Joseph's dream in the heavens at the same presentment moment that Jesus is receiving obeisance, and so is the subject of Joseph's dream. We see Mercury and Mars situated on one side of Jupiter, which represents Joseph, a strong type of Christ. Then we see our kissing solar eclipse sun and moon representing the father and the mother. Jupiter, with the solar eclipse, are uniformly in the center. The third planet we see is Saturn on the other side of Jupiter, and the fourth planet we see is Venus. That is 4 planets or stars that are visible to the eye. We now need 7 more stars to make up the 11 stars quoted in Joseph's dream. Nearby is the most obvious star cluster to the eye called the Pleiades, which is traditionally called the 7 Sisters. 4 planets and 7 stars totaling 11 stars, the sun and moon with the king planet Jupiter in the center receiving worship. It is striking to see how evenly spaced the celestial bodies are, as people are often uniformly spaced when they worship. Now you have seen the back parts of God in a similar manner to Moses. While the actual events are playing out on the earth at their appointed times, the celestial heavens, which is a clock, has performed the signs that mimic the context of the events that they were designed to portray in real time. God acted as a solar eclipse over Moses to tell him what he has done with his signs over Israel. He put his words into Moses' mouth, which we now have as his scriptures, and connected them as a foundation to the celestial signs as a tabernacle built on top the land foundation, which is Zion, the land of Israel.
And I have put my words in thy mouth, and I have covered thee in the shadow of mine hand, that I may plant the heavens, and lay the foundations of the earth, and say unto Zion, Thou art my people. Isaiah 51 verse 16.
Prophecy is events in time. Mankind has not discerned correctly time since the papacy changed it. Time is measured with the birth of Jesus as the focal point because God's plan and purpose is centered on Jesus. It is stated as the number of years before or after he was born. As we've established his birth date, we can now move on to establishing the correct date for all the prophecies. The signs are signposts. Many verses with celestial sign descriptors help us to identify the date of the prophecy of the chapter. At this point, the only elements left in the narrative of the nativity story of Jesus is 2 years hence when the wise men visit King Herod. The wise men see the star again and are amazed and encouraged that their efforts will be fruitful. The children in Bethlehem are killed. Herod dies and about 2 weeks later Jesus misses his second Passover, which was very rebellious due to King Herod dying. The family leaves Egypt and returns to Nazareth, where they will be less discoverable and feel safe. The historian Josephus gives us a very detailed account of the events leading up to the death of King Herod and timeframes and events after he died, including the Passover.
Lamps Full Understandings. Please like, subscribe and share.